final session is about piloting and scaling up, which would discuss about understanding piloting and scaling up in context and different challenges faced. So this session will be shared by two speakers. Our first speaker is currently the Director of Center for Biomedical Innovation in University of Moratuwa, as well as a senior lecturer in the Department of Electronic and Telecommunication Engineering at University of Moratuwa. He is also the founder of Kairos Sensing. He received his Bachelor of Engineering in Medical from Queensland University of Technology and received his PhD in Mechanical Engineering from University of Queensland, Australia. Before moving into research, he worked nearly four years in industry as a mechanical design engineer. His current research interests include soft and hard tissue biomechanics, polymer-based biomaterials, wearable sensor-based motion capturing for rehabilitation and sport analysis, and engineering education. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Pujitha Silva. And the next speaker to share the session with Dr. Pujitha is currently the Commercial Products Manager at the Center for Biomedical Innovation, University of Moratuwa, and a visiting lecturer in Business Management and Entrepreneurship at Faculty of Business, University of Moratuwa. He received his first degree in chemistry from the University of Peradeniya and a master's degree in chemical and process engineering from University of Moratuwa. He has worked with HSBC Group from 2008 as a commercial and investment banker in the UK and Europe, and holds experience in that capacity for about 8 years. He obtained a preliminary MBA in banking from Imperial College, London, before obtaining his MBA in international business from University of Colombo. He worked with BOI Sri Lanka as the manager innovations of a multinational company before joining SEBI as a project manager. He undertook teaching as a visiting lecturer in business and entrepreneurship at the University of Moratuwa, where his primary interest was innovation in commercialization of research. So please join me in welcoming the second speaker for the session, Mr. Shalika Sirivardana. So over to you, Dr. Silva and Mr. Sirivardana.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Gayani, for your introduction. And as she said that Mr. Shalika Sirivardana and myself will be presenting this. So my role today, along with my colleague, Mr. Shalika, is going to be to talk about another aspect of this product development, which is more on the scaling and the piloting and the scaling up of the product. So as a content summary, I'll be going through the first half, specifically focusing on another product that we are developing. And Shalika will do the remaining part of it, talking more about the scaling up aspect of the product. So just to give some context, the product I want to talk about today is about a hydrogel footwear solution for diabetic feet, which is a product that's been developed under the patronage of the AHEAD grant scheme for commercialization of these projects. So this is a product that has been developed from the university, and our aim is to take it out into the market. So what I will be sharing are some of the challenges as well as some of the processes that we've been involved in developing it from the university and trying to commercialize it with the help of a commercial partner outside the university. So to give some context, now when we started this product development, or when we applied for this grant, we already had a material that was actually a hydrogel material, which is a polymer that has got a large amount of water, and we had developed it to a level where it had mechanical integrity, so much so that you could apply that in an application, as you can see here on the left hand side of my screen, where you could even trample on it and it would be able to withstand the weight or the pressure of a human foot. So that was the material we started off with. And then we had an interest in bringing it into the domain of the diabetic foot. So what we knew from science or from the clinical evidence was that ulcers result in the diabetic feet. And the reason for that is a high intensity or a high concentration of what we call peak pressures on the surface of the plantar. And when these feet are not properly taken care of, it leads to a diabetic ulcer. Ulcers, if allowed to kind of propagate will eventually lead to an amputation, and that is what we want to avoid. So traditionally, these ulcers are being addressed by a wound dressing, and they also have what is called an offloading solution. So a way of loading loading the foot differently so as to take the pressure off the foot, or rather the ulcer area. And as you know, there are diabetic footwear. So there is some solution that is available out there. So we wanted to see whether we could bring our hydrogel and somehow meet this need in the form of a insert or some offloading device. That way we would be able to bring this product out and give meaningful sort of application to this product or this material that we were developing. So just when we went into a bit of the preliminary work, we understood now what is on the left-hand side of the screen is basically the current solution. When a person has an ulcer, they actually get this offloading done with the help of these rolls of bandages. So the foot might result in something like what is in the middle of the screen where my cursor is, where a person would actually have. So this is not first of all, whether it is a functional solution, certainly it is not uh, a solution that actually works, because by the time a person actually walks for about 50 meters wearing this sort of a foot sort of bandage, what you see at the bottom of the screen is basically what it would end up looking like. So there is no real biomechanical cushioning that is available. And aesthetically, if you think about it, a person who's wearing this, who has an ulcer, if this is what it would look like once it's dressed, certainly this is going to be socially, it's going to attract some stigma. So there was certainly a need to kind of come up with a different offloading solution, which is where our product or our material was actually finding some usefulness. So there are two different ways in which we are trying to bring it out. One in the form of a gel plaster that can actually, as you can see, it has a a small area. It will actually be used for offloading. Because the gel has the mechanical integrity, it will be able to sustain the applied load on the foot. So, and also aesthetically, it will be a lot more appealing. And we can also bring that into a different form in the form of a diabetic footwear. So this is just basically the concept of the product. And so you would call this somewhat like a hybrid innovation, because part of it is driven by our vision to bring hydrogel into a domain of application. And also it's also, there's a need out there from clients or from patients that uh, that demands that we also kind of come up with something that would meet their requirement as well. So it's just a hybrid of the two. So that's where I want to pitch this presentation. So today, as I'm sharing this, I've borrowed this from Dr. Nuan, who explained to us this whole process of R&D leading to the commercialization, in the commercialization process, and along the way, the regulation that needs to be met. So where does piloting and scaling up comes in? It comes in this area where you are doing a non-clinical study or a clinical study. So this is where you're going to get the understanding of how your process or the process of developing the material in our case has to be done in such a way we have these requirements of licensing in mind. So specifically, the product itself has to be licensed in terms of its efficacy. If you're saying it's going to actually perform a biomechanical function in offloading, we need to have some user testing studies that we will actually be able to demonstrate as proof. Secondly, the manufacturing plant that is going to be involved in developing this needs to also fulfill certain requirements, for example, the good manufacturing practices and quality management systems. So this is one aspect of the licensing would be on the product. One will actually be on the production facility. So in the piloting aspect, we have to keep all of that in mind in how we synthesize this material in such a way that it can actually be productized. And secondly, the aspect of scaling up, which which is the industrial level scaling, and keeping in mind the parameters that need to be changed so as not to violate the same licensing conditions, you would say. So you would say in that process, the supervisory regulation uh, that is required in terms of the regulator supervising the process goes all the way to the piloting run as well as the scaling up practices. So in a way, we are thinking of piloting and scaling up with the regulation in mind, to put it in a simple way. So I would like to take us down this path in relation to this particular product. So what happened on the project was that we started with the gel, but we wanted to improve that. Certainly, when we thought about the diabetic market, there were certain things we needed to do to the gel, apart from it being simply a biomechanically, we would say, strong material. There were other things that we needed to do in order to improve its properties. For example, we had to improve the fatigue properties of this material. We had to make sure that it had a level of stiffness, but at the same time, a level of softness and a recoverability, a number of these things, low shear. So these are some of the mechanical parameters. And also, we couldn't allow the gel to just evaporate. That is one of the issues with using these hydrogels. So there was some R&D lab work that needed to be done to improve this towards a prototype that was amicable with the requirements of a diabetic foot. So at that point, we had to then go to the industry and then start to think about the product concept. So initially, we started with one foot care manufacturer. We went to them. We wanted to see how this would fit into their product portfolio and how we can actually bring this into the market. And so there were some negotiations, some consultations that took place, and that and then we came back to the university, and we had to kind of start simulating the industry process, uh, and that required us to start changing certain ways in which the synthesis was done. So it was one thing to develop this product using a lab concept in a normal laboratory, but when we thought about how it was actually going to translate into the manufacturing practice, how long will it take, what would be the cost, how would you minimize the cost, how would you kind of figure out a different way to basically to minimize the time on developing the product, what sort of technical requirements would be needed, can you simplify the process so that a not so technical person can still do the manufacturing. Whereas in a lab, you would find a research scientist doing this work. So a number of those simulations and adaptations had to be done to further bring down the time of synthesis and preparation of this raw material, which is the gel. So, when we started the project, it took about 7 days to actually develop the gel and to bring it to the place where we felt it was right. But then over the period, we had to bring it down to or improve our process in such a way that we could bring it down to about 3 days. And now we have brought it down to a few hours, or within a day, we can actually have the gel ready, which is a sort of probably a requirement that industry would place on us. So then we had to, after that, or simultaneously, we also had to consult a consultant who was then helping us to optimize the industry parameters. So that was not some information that we had with the team. So we had to consult somebody externally who then took the whole process and was actually able to optimize it in such a way that the time was able to, one of those main things that we were able to decrease was time, and hence also the cost, but at the same time while maintaining the mechanical integrity of the product or the material. So this was our preliminary work. And so I just want to also talk about some of the activities that went into the piloting specifically. So preliminary studies for market identification and evaluation. So when we were developing the product as the material, initially we didn't have the market, identified properly. So we knew that we needed to actually bring this into the diabetic market, but we didn't know where to pitch this. And so two things that I would just want to highlight is, first of all, Dr. Travis talked about getting the minimum viable product out. What was the quickest, easiest way to bring something out into the market? And Dr. Angelo talked about a very important concept. And if you want to target it, you need to know whom to speak to. And so I'll kind of illustrate that by referring to this diagram. So we had to come up with a way of understanding the whole the diabetic spectrum. So before people get a callus is the first formation of a diabetic related, you would say, a deformity in the foot. Before that, you actually have a market where people have a lot of foot problems or feet problems, from heel pain to other non-diabetic related, foot problems. So certainly there's a market there. Then you have people who have other type of wounds, non-diabetic wounds. Again, this offloading solution can actually be useful to them. Then you have the callocytes, which is the calluses that form as a result of diabetic, leading to ulcers, leading to amputations. So even after an amputation, an offloading solution would still be useful, because you're trying to heal the wound related to the, the amputation. And once a person has an amputation, there's a higher chance of re-ulceration happening as well. So once a person reaches that stage of a ulcer, that person will become more and more reliant on a offloading solution, or a solution that would be, in most cases, prescribed by a doctor. So like Dr. Angelo said, if somebody has a problem with their feet in a commercial, maybe like an industry, like a factory sort of a setting, you go and talk to the supervisor or supervising or the HR. So in the similar way, when people have diabetic wounds, if they, the initial stages, they might not take a doctor's recommendation too seriously. Right? They might not even take care of a callus properly. But then as the condition progresses, more and more they are dependent on the prescription of the doctor, or the doctor is guiding or relating or kind of driving the process of what solution they ought to wear. So that way patients that requirement then therefore as a product has to be pushed or influenced more by a medical practitioner. So then we looked at many other things in terms of the decision-making power, as I mentioned here, a patient, the exact population of people, the market selection, the affordability. And then we felt that our first product should actually come into the diabetic ulcer market. So also as a product, a person who has an ulcer will not be using the gel. If you think about the fatigue cycles, will not be using it as much as perhaps somebody who was an athlete. So an athlete would actually have a higher demand in terms of the usage compared to a diabetic person who might be using it only for about 1,000 steps a day on each foot, right? So having done that, so this is one of the things that we had to do in the piloting in terms of identifying the required, market, understanding what was our the unique value proposition we can bring into this group of people. And the piloting continued as we had to qualify, we had to find the right type of consultant who could actually help us, as I say, with the synthesis or the manufacturing facility. Then we had to look at the review of the industry and the regulatory requirements. Because we knew that this was going to go as a medical device, we had to look at all the requirements of an MRA, as I said, the good manufacturing practices, as well as so many other conditions that are there if we want to bring this. So in a way, those requirements also qualifies the industrial partner. Because if you have to go with a partner, it is not like any other product. A biomedical or a medical device would has to be manufactured in such a way that it adheres to certain stipulations. So in a way, we had to go back to our industry partner and get them to buy into the to the idea of actually manufacturing it in a particular way. Now, we have had some challenges in this regard. So these are some of the challenges we are still working through in this regard of trying to get an MRA approval with the help of this manufacturing partner. And then we also had to start looking at the manufacturing requirements. One of the biggest one being the raw materials. So in the time of a pandemic, as well as this particular gel requires a particular chemical, and that is not locally available, so we have to import it. So then when it comes to licenses for importing certain chemicals, only certain people have it. And then in a time like this, it was probably not the best thing to put pressure on an industrial partner to try to get some new licenses. So in a way, it kind of constrained us in terms of who would be the likely people with whom we can go. And we had some other challenges in not being able to simulate exactly what we did in the lab, until or unless we got the industrial space worked out for us. We had some HR management requirements as well, because while the manufacturer was going to support manufacturing it, we had to also figure out what was the support that we were going to give from the university side. So we needed to bring the R&D aspect. We needed to bring the supervisory consultant from our side, who would then help to uh, improve the supervisory, the process aspect. And it had to be an ongoing process once the product gets handed over to the industry partner, because we have to do some more R&D to improve it once it hits the market. So these are some of the things that we had to do in a piloting stage. Now this brought us to negotiating with the industry, so industry partner. For example, we had to actually look at the whole review of the whole process, as I mentioned earlier. There are certain things that the industry would expect or industry would be required to do within their capabilities, to which we have to now adjust and adapt our product in a way. Then we also wanted the industry, the partner, to actually invest into some new infrastructure as well, because the person that we went with was not traditionally into a medical area. They were into a different area, but they had access to chemicals and they were willing to work with us. But there was some new infrastructure that they had to invest into before before they could kind of make their facility amenable to this particular product. So then we had to look at the Sri Lankan context as well. Now, the good thing is that they were open to the diversification. They are open to try out something new. And then the labor abundance as well. Another thing. Now, this is a product that would still require some technical understanding in terms of developing it. So so we are in a place where we can have access to such people. And so Sri Lanka, I believe, is right to develop a product of this nature. The labor costs are not too high. We can still maintain it. So that would be one advantage we can bring into developing a product here versus developing the same product elsewhere, because the market is ripe, the market is there. Pakistan has 10 times our population, and the prevalence of diabetes is 10 times, it's the same. So that means it's 10 times the market. The India has 50 times our market. But developing it here, I believe, would give us an advantage, because the market, we can easily take it outside. And also little additional investment in extreme automation. So now, because the labor costs are such that you don't need to automate it too much, you are able to actually maintain with the people who can actually develop it. So these are some of the positive things when we engage with industry in terms of bringing this product. But obviously, the pandemic has actually turned things a bit upside down in probably causing a bit of trepidation or a bit of fear, anxiety in terms of moving into new areas. So certainly that has proven to be a roadblock for us to fully bring this into the market as we had planned in the timelines that we had planned for. So this is where I want to hand it over to my colleague, Shalika, to take us beyond this, to talk about some other issues pertaining to piloting as well as the scaling up process. Over to you, Shalika.
Okay, okay, Dr. Pujitha, really appreciate. So thanks a lot for the initial introduction, and also making the environment for me to uh, start the discussion on the scaling up and how did we enter into the aspect of talking about the quantities and also the volumes of the production. So I have to acknowledge that I am going to stand a little bit on the shoulders of the picture created by Mr. Indikadulla in terms of the industrial aspects and also some of the concepts Dr. Travis initially introduced about the production and industrial process, which is quite different to what we generally see in a university-based context. So in the scaling up, while we are in the discussions and the negotiations with the industrial partner, one of the key concerns was the piloting project, which is basically a sort of a process where we used to understand what the actual commercial industrial process is going to be. So the piloting required sort of a smaller piloting plant, which has a small capacity, but it actually simulates the manufacturing process that will be actually used by the industrial partner. So that was a requirement. Then when we undertake the negotiations, we realize that the industrial partners prefer to have a minimal investment. So this may not be the norm in other terms, but in the current context, the industrial partners prefer to have the minimal investment in terms of building up the piloting scale, because earlier in the discussion, Dr. Pujitha mentioned that there are certain complications that the entire country is experiencing in terms of the COVID situation. So investment was a question, but the next one is the ability to run at minimal infrastructure investment. This is an additional investment because production of a hydrogel or related articles will not be the normal. It has not been there in the market. So the production is a kind of a new adventure that most of the companies will enter into. So the industrial partnerships considered minimal investment into the piloting, and also when it goes to the commercial production scale. So the next one was the capability of manufacturing. So we realized the industrial partnerships that we potentially shortlisted had the capacity of manufacturing between a small quantity, which is like 5 kilograms to 2 tons, which is a large range. So that was considered to be an advantage. So we are actually working on the possibility of having that sort of a range, especially in terms of the next aspect I'm going to talk about, which is the short run average cost and the long run average cost. So don't be scared about these terms. The short run and long run average cost means when you scale up a production from a smaller scale to a large, special attention into market dynamics. So when it comes to the cost and task sharing between the collaborators, as we discussed, when we scale up and do the conversion into the industrial process, importing materials is something that we need the sharing and the collaboration from the industry, because industries have higher negotiating power, and also they have the cost benefit when we actually import various goods and services. So we have looked at the possibility of obtaining that cost benefit for the piloting process as well. That was one of the areas, and also the human resource cost sharing. So in our particular research and also commercialization, the intellectual inputs, most of the intellectual inputs were from the university or the side of SEBI, while the manual labor and also the industrial capabilities, that sort of human resource was an input from the industrial side. Then the market developments, that means going into the markets and also approaching the market, was something that we sought support from the industry, because industries have better reach to the markets than a university-based research team will have. So market developments was something that we are collaboratively working with the industrial partnerships to make sure that we approach the right market and understand what are the dynamics of that particular market. Further developments is something where we work further on improving the product because, as you know, the product may not be perfect at the initial launch. Excuse me. And also further developments in terms of services, the product associates with services. So earlier you may have seen we are trying to associate a service element of this product, which is a sort of analytical method, and also to understand the requirement of the patients. So further developments on those sides will also be done in collaboration with the industrial partner, because there will be various infrastructure that will be required for us to deploy the service into the markets. When it comes to challenges, you may have heard earlier from our speakers that there are certain hurdles that the industries have to undergo, particularly at a period where there is a pandemic. So one issue was the reduced availability of import facilities to the academic institution, particularly because universities are not conveniently obtaining the tax benefits, and also there is no specific preferential channel for the university to procure or undertake certain activities. So this is something that quite a lot of administrative people are working on, but still cost and approvals are still not sort of a favorable situation for the universities, because sometimes we expected that the universities may get special tax benefit for product development, especially for academic purposes. The second one was the availability of certain facilities at the universities, especially the simulation. If you look at the understanding of the patient side, simulation facilities available at the university is limited, but we are actually building up the infrastructure and the capacity to enhance the simulation facilities, such as software, fluid dynamics. These kind of simulation facilities are being looked at in terms of the capacity that we have at the university. The next one is the local raw material availability and procurement. So most of the, as Mr. Indikadul earlier mentioned, most of the industrial raw materials and also machinery, testing machinery, these things have to be imported. So importing process has become a bit hampered after the pandemic. So there is a bit of a delay, but still, since the world is gradually picking up on these kind of processes, we are actually expecting an enhancement. And also we looked at possibility of having a collaboration with industries with who already have import licenses, because certain materials have to be imported under specific licenses. Sometimes there may be special goods, special defense licenses need to be taken for certain materials. So we looked at the possibility of establishing negotiations with industries with licenses. The most critical challenge that we had was the COVID-19 related issues, which everyone would appreciate that the labor issue was a critical problem. Because of the travel restrictions, the industry faced labor issues, and also procurement. Procurement was a bit delayed. There was a backlog in the customs clearances, and also the next one is the access to the factories and also the research laboratories at the university. So these were issues that we had, but we had certain workarounds like getting special approvals to work on this thing. So although these were challenges, we had figured out various ways to minimize the delays based on these challenges. And also, as I mentioned, import restrictions are there, but the improvements we are working on the product development will actually be especially focusing on how to minimize the import restrictions and also improve materials which are not hampered by import restrictions. If I want to give a kind of a summary picture of where we are, what we are doing now, just before I finish, Currently, we are working on the regulatory approvals as explained by Dr. Nuan earlier in the series. We are working with the regulatory body, which is NMRA predominantly, in terms of providing information and also what sort of things, what sort of user trials that we need to provide to get the approval. Then the negotiations with the industry partners for the process development. So so process developments are important to make sure that the process is cost efficient and also it is more user friendly. And also in terms of market changes, the requirements of market will change. So we need to change the process accordingly. Procurement of machinery and materials. We are working on continuous procurement of machinery, which takes time, but the industry is working with us closely for the procurement. Finally, continuous product development, which means we can't just stick into one product. We need to make sure that the product will undergo an evolution process to make sure it fits the market requirements and also the changing needs of the market. So there is a learning process that we undergo jointly with the industrial partnerships as well as ourselves to learn from what's happening in the markets and also from the competition. So these are the processes that we undertake at the moment. This is the position that we have. So with that, it gives us a sort of an overall picture of where the project is. So with that, I would like to hand over the session to Dr. Gayani to continue with the rest of the process. Thank you very much.